All right, Big Bang. Today is Friday, January 29th. Welcome to the Dog Walk, presented by Barstool Sports. It's True Crime Friday. I'm on Zoom with True Crime Allie. Allie, how are you?
Good. How are you?
Doing good, doing good. We got another big one today. One that I've always been curious about, but one that I've never really dove into. So I was pretty excited when you texted me the topic. It's about Robert Fisher, a guy who's been on the top 10 FBI list, the top 10 FBI's most wanted list for a long time.
Yeah, like 20 years now.
Yeah. And it's him and for some reason, like I'll check that out periodically.
Mhm.
And him and there's a guy I don't know why,
You
but like
just casually check out the FBI top
it
wanted
just
list.
it just crosses my desk here and there. So for some reason, I always remember him. And then there's like another guy like Derek Brown or something, who like killed an armed guard and like rode a bicycle out or something. He's like, I don't know, like there's just two striking things about those guys. So I was pretty interested to jump in. It was pretty. It's a pretty gruesome one, and yeah, it's a big one because, like I said, we're coming up on the 20th anniversary of it, also. So
That's right. We are.
Mhm.
And okay, so before we get started, do you like I know you know this case, but do you know a lot of like insight into it or no?
No, as far as like insight, like I know what he did.
Hmm.
I know what happened from there. I know where he kind of went initially, and then that's just about all I know.
Okay. Good. 'Cause then like we usually do is lay out the story and then we'll get it. We can like discuss because there's so many different theories on this case because it is one of those like whodunit cases that I'm interested to see your opinion because last time we did one of these cases, I think it was John Bonet, and we did not have the same theory.
Yeah, exactly. So, yeah, that's probably the best way to do it. Just lay out who Robert Fisher is, what he did, and then kind of hearing the theories. It's always one of the most interesting parts.
Yeah. All right. Well, if you're all set, then I will jump in.
Let's do it.
And so Robert Fisher was born April 13th, 1961 in Brooklyn, New York. And for the most part, contrary to some of the other people that we have discussed on past episodes, he had a pretty normal upbringing, pretty normal childhood, other than when he was 15, his parents had a pretty nasty divorce. And he was 15 at the time. So that's kind of a pivotal age for that to be happening as well. You know, you're like that weird, awkward teenage age. You're obviously like going through a lot of stuff. So then tack on a nasty divorce from your parents onto the top of that. That can be pretty traumatizing. But that's really like the only big thing. So from that, his mom ended up leaving, and it kind of actually plays out into like his qualities later on as an adult and in his own marriage. But he was a Navy veteran. He married his wife, Mary Fisher, in 1987, and they had their happy, quote unquote, happy little family in Scottsdale, Arizona. So we're taking it out west. They also had two kids, one son and one daughter, Brittany Fisher and Robert Fisher Jr. And Robert Fisher himself he kind of was like a jack of all trades. He held a lot of different jobs. He was very handy, outdoorsy. He worked in the medical field at one point. He was a firefighter at one point. When he disappeared, he was working at Mayo Clinic at the time, actually. And he was also like an avid hunter, an avid fisher. So he was very resourceful, stuff like that. He was also an avid Baptist. So he really wanted to portray that perfect kind of family picture. We've got this picture perfect family. I, go to church every Sunday, this kind of perfect portrait. And that was that was like a huge goal of his, but he was not necessarily achieving that because behind closed doors, like, is a whole nother story for a lot of people. But people kind of described Fisher as like cruel, distant, socially awkward. He was a huge control freak. So, trying to create that like perfect family picture wasn't really working out for him.
Yeah, like you said, he was big into his religion. He was big on making sure what happened to him as a kid didn't happen to his kids. You know, he was married. He was like, this is one true love, one true wife, and he really tried to stick to that code. And we could keep going because it obviously doesn't work out.
Yeah, it didn't work out so well. So he, like you said, he was very big into his religion. And in 1998, so almost 10 years after they had been married, the Fishers, Mary and Robert, ended up going to marriage counseling. And this was because they were trying to repair damage from Robert having an affair. Essentially, long story short, Robert Fisher went to a little rub and tug joint, got it on with his masseuse, and ended up contracting a UTI from this. So he admitted the affair to his wife, and he was kind of caught red-handed. And then from this, they were like, all right, let's go to marriage counseling. Let's fix this. Divorce was very much not an option for Robert.
Yeah, he was like so against it.
Yeah, he was like, I'm not doing that. I'm not going through what my parents put me through. I'm not going to put my children through that. We're going to have this, perfect family kind of thing. So that was not on the table. And so with the affair also, that kind of one-off affair thing was not said to be his only affair. So it was also said that he kind of had this side secret girlfriend. Potentially it was with someone he worked with. But he clearly had control issues, loyalty issues. I mean, very much like behind closed doors, it was a whole nother nightmare going on.
Well, yeah, he wasn't happy in his marriage, clearly, and
Yeah.
he refused to get out of it because he was so damaged from his own parents getting divorced. So when you mix that in with, being super religious and like actually believing that it's wrong, it's not a good situation.
Right. So he was kind of, between a rock and a hard place. And they, clearly the picture perfect family thing did not pan out at all. Robert and Mary Fisher were also known to have these like big blowout fights, like screaming, yelling, and like often, to the point where like that's what the neighbors knew them for. They're like, oh, those are the neighbors that scream and yell at each other all of the time. So as much as he was like, again, trying to portray this perfect family man, perfect picture, it was not going well. The neighbors knew them to have these like huge fights pretty often. And when Robert had enough, he would just get in the car, take off, go camping for a couple days, and, come back a couple days later, everything would be fine until the next fight. And that was just like how they rolled.
And what's interesting too is from everything I've gathered, he never yelled. Like nobody had ever seen him yell. So it was always Mary Fisher, his wife, who would yell, and she would scream at him. And that's what most of the neighbors would hear. They would report hearing her just going kind of nuts. Mm-hmm. And Robert, like obviously he was clearly still in the argument, but he was just one of those weird guys. And everything you hear about him, and it's such a fascinating thing because the way he looks, it just makes so much sense. Did you feel that way too?
Yes, I had actually. So prior to doing this episode, I knew the story, but I actually hadn't seen a picture of him. So when I was starting to look up like the images of him, I was like, okay. I could see like, yeah, he just kind of has this like look to him.
Like a militant look.
Yes, very much. Very, very much. So he's very built too. Like you can tell he's like that outdoorsy kind of guy. He kind of,
he's got those eyes too.
Yeah. I was just gonna say, he's kind of got those like crazy eyes.
Yes. And like, listen, I get it. Like, hey, militant and, hunting and fishing guy. And I know 99% of you people are normal, so I'm not coming at you guys, but yeah. He's got the look of someone who does that shit, but like takes it to another level. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And it's funny you say that because there was accounts of like his friends, they had gone hunting and stuff together before. And there was actually a time where he was hunting with a friend, and like the friend very much noticed that it wasn't necessarily like the hunting portion of like, oh, hunting for, deer, you eat the meat, or, just to enjoy the gaming aspect of it. It was like, he was literally hunting. He enjoyed the killing aspect of it. And so much so that he and his friend were hunting, and they, were skinning the animals that they caught. And the friend turned around, and Robert was taking the animal blood and like smearing it all over himself.
Yeah, there was that. There was another story I saw when he was on a fishing trip. He just put a knife in his mouth and would jump in and just go swim around looking for fish, and would kind of like not creep on other boats, but just very creepy, just very.
Yeah, like who does that?
Yeah, it's just a weird move.
Yeah, there was definitely something was off there. I mean, so it very much plays into he was his own character. It was also said, so this kind of ties to some of the theories we'll get to later on, but it was also said that he had Jekyll and Hyde syndrome, which for those of you guys who don't know what that is, it's this, back and forth between like having an kind of like an alter ego or portraying something else. So very much like we had said, he was one way. He had this like very much dark, odd side, odd behaviors, like something was off, but he portrayed this like totally different person, which can, like I said, it can play into things very much, but there was something about him that wasn't quite right. And with the Jekyll and Hyde thing, like it very much can play into criminal behavior and stuff like that, or psychotic breaks and all of that. So he was dealing with that as well, whether he would admit it or not. So Robert and Mary Fisher, this brings us over to, even though they were unhappy, Robert was not about to go through a divorce, put his family through that, do that whole thing. A few weeks prior to the family being murdered, not Robert, Mary and the two kids being murdered, Mary had actually confided in some of her friends that she was going to file for divorce, because that, contrary to Robert, that was on the table for her. She was like, I'm not happy. You're not happy. We don't have a happy family here. Like, I'm going to leave. I'm going to remove myself from this situation. And so she confided in people, I think knowingly that, she knew Robert was not going to take that well, especially with him being very controlling, like for him to lose that control of his family and for it to be, her decision to make the divorce, in addition with he was not down with the divorce thing. So she knew it was not going to go well. And that brings us up to April 9th, 2001. For the most part, it was a pretty normal day. It was a Monday. Robert had the day off. And he did, he ran errands. He fixed things around the house. He changed the oil in his truck. And later that evening, like each one of the kids had an obligation or event that they had to be at. So one parent went one way, one parent went the other way. And then they all, came back together in the evening. Totally normal day. And then we get to around 10:30-ish at night. So pretty late into the evening, especially for like a Monday. Robert and Mary get into another one of their blowout fights, screaming, yelling. Robert, again, like he normally does, gets in the car, takes off. And that was the last time he was ever seen in person. He was seen shortly after that on ATM footage with like a nearby ATM. And he withdrew $280 of cash, which is a very specific amount. And very much that was the last time he was ever seen, was that ATM footage.
Yeah. And he took his wife's car, like, and it was,
yeah,
the ATM footage is, you're like, why 280? But, regardless. Yeah. Yeah.
And it's not like that, it's not like that 280 was like all the family had. They had plenty more that he could have taken out. He just didn't. And like you said, he was in Mary's SUV, which was not the car he took to get an oil change earlier that day. And like, if you're going to say he were going to go to that ATM and like withdraw all the money. And like sometimes ATMs have limits, like, oh, you can only withdraw $500 or $300 or whatever it is. I can't imagine that like 280 is just like random cap that the ATM.
Yeah, for sure.
Caps you at, which I don't think so. So, but that was, like I said, that was the last time he was ever seen, was this footage. Fast forward almost 12 hours, so all through the night, just before 9 a.m. on April 10th, the Fisher family house explodes. And I'm talking like huge explosion to where everyone within half a mile could feel the explosion. So
Yeah, and listen, I know people who listen, you're probably gonna be, wanting to look more up on this case. And even if you don't, whatever, you should definitely go look at the video of this explosion, because Allie's right. This isn't just like a fire. This is like crazy. It's so fucking it's just blazing it's tough to recall seeing something that's burning like this,
yeah, and the house was literally a ticking time bomb, because not only, like you said, it wasn't just like the house caught on fire, it literally exploded, and it was filling with gas for about 12 hours beforehand. The house explosion was actually a natural gas explosion versus like having a homemade bomb or something in it. So the gas line from the furnace had been pulled, and that was leaking that natural gas into the house all night long. Like I said, this fire happened around 10:30 p.m. It's getting late. The kids may or may not have already been in bed. This gas line is pulled sometime after that, and the house is then filling and filling with gas. The firefighter said that the explosion initiated from the living room, and it was actually due to a candle that was lit. So the candle in itself is not necessarily like premeditation. Add it to the gas line and the fact that the house was also doused in some sort of accelerant. Unfortunately, due to the state of the house and how burnt it was, they couldn't tell what kind of accelerant it was, but their best guess was that it was gasoline. So that, put all three of those together, natural gas candle and dousing an accelerant, you've got some premeditation there.
Yeah, and like you said, he had enough wherewithal there where when he left that night before he went to the ATM, he knew the gas was going, and he was a fireman before, so he lit that candle knowing that the gas would go immediately up, and then it would drop down, and then once it caught that candle flame, the whole house was going to go, and gave himself a pretty good head start.
Yeah, he did, which we'll get into later, but like you said, he was a firefighter, so he obviously knew what fire did to human bodies, and especially the fact that it doesn't disintegrate human bodies, it burns them. And the family was very much, burnt. The house was burnt to a crisp, but like you said, he was a firefighter. He had experience in that, so that could have been the difference between like a homemade bomb or something like that, pipe bomb. The firefighters, they got there pretty quickly, but they actually had a hard time controlling the fire because it was a natural gas fire. And since that line was pulled, there was still gas leaking into the house after the house exploded. So it was just like feeding the fire. So they couldn't go in and like do any search and rescue until they got this fire out, which took a while. It's a gas fire. An entire house exploded. Once the fire was out, they went in, and obviously law enforcement was there to check out the scene, and they discovered the bodies of Mary Fisher, who was 38, Brittany Fisher, the daughter, who was 12, and Robert Fisher Jr., who was 10. Also, while they were, they go in to search the house after it was burnt down, and they don't know what they're walking into. They don't know whose house this is, who occupies it, whether they're there or not, where everyone is, stuff like that. So they didn't know what they were going to find. Not only did they go in to find the three of them deceased, but it was also very obvious that the three of them had actually been deceased prior to the explosion, because all three of them, their throats were slit. And when I say slit, I literally mean ear to ear, like they were almost decapitated slit. And
so far much that it like hit vertebrae.
Right. I shouldn't say whoever did it, very much, it was incredibly intentional. All three of them, almost had their heads cut off. And they were all actually in bed. So, and like we said, the fight happened late at night, and so it would make sense that they were in bed. But Mary had also been shot in the back of the head. So that right there is super personal, very much overkill.
It was a rage thing, it seemed.
Yeah, it was a rage thing. And now the house is exploded. So that's like triple overkill. So as far as, law enforcement goes, police weren't really sure where to go from here, other than the fact that here's these 3 family members. They were clearly dead before the explosion. The explosion was clearly intentional. So we've got some sort of homicide, murder, explosion, all this stuff, some sort of premeditation in there. And so 4 days later, on April 14th, Robert was named the official suspect because he was nowhere to be found. And there was no one else pointing to wanting to do this to the family. 6 days after that, that brings us to April 20th, 10 days after the explosion. Mary's car, it was a silver Toyota 4Runner, so the SUV, was found in the middle of Tonto National Forest, which is way up north. It was found very much off the beaten path. This is hundreds of miles from the family home. It's not close. And along with the car, they found the family dog. His name was Blue. And he had made a burrow under the car and just kind of made a little bed for himself. So who knows how long he was there, but he wasn't tied up. He wasn't, to my knowledge, he was not harmed in any way. But again, Robert was nowhere to be found. So,
strange scene right in the middle of the forest. Yeah, and there's pictures, there's video. You could see just the white 4Runner sitting there with that poor, I believe it was a German Shepherd, just out in the woods by itself. I think I read that it had, porcupine needles in its mouth because it obviously was hungry, and so it's a strange scene just to see, I don't know, did you ever go in the woods as a kid?
Yeah, we definitely played in the woods. You get you get dirty.
Yeah. And when you ever see a car in there?
No.
Really? Oh, I've seen one. I've seen a car in the woods. Yeah.
What forests are you playing in that there's just a car chilling?
I've seen a car in the forest reserves here on the northwest side, and it's always how the fuck did that get there?
And yeah, why? That's actually super suspicious that you just came across these cars.
I know, and that's whenever I saw this, I was like, geez, that's something. But regardless,
and there was a lot of weird stuff about the Fisher car that was found, because so it's found in the middle of a forest, right? Obviously abandoned besides the dog. And this is 10 days after the explosion that they find this car way off the beaten path. But the weird thing about the car, there were several weird things. First of all, the car mirrors had been pushed in. If you were going to park in a really tight parking spot and you push in your mirrors, they were pushed in like that, which if you're in the middle of the forest, I have no idea why you're worried about that. And all the windows were rolled down, which, okay, fine, whatever. But the other thing is, so it was parked in the middle of a forest under these huge pine trees, but there was not a single pine needle found on or in the car, which indicates it had been there for less than 24 hours. And we're 10 days after the explosion. So it was very fresh.
For sure.
And
it had to be.
Right. So, not only was the car no pine needles anywhere, but the car was also completely wiped clean, which to me is the most suspicious part of it, being that there was no fingerprints, no DNA, no fibers, no hairs, nothing. It was completely clean, other than one fingerprint found on a coffee mug in the cup holder, which was Robert's fingerprint. And why wipe the car? It's your car. Your DNA is expected to be in it. All 4 of their DNA should have been found in it. There should have been stuff everywhere. I mean, it's a family car.
What would be his point? What would be the point to even do that?
Right. It does not make sense. Very much does not make sense. And that's clearly intentional, because if the only thing found in an entire car. I mean, think about all of the like nooks and crannies and like little places in a car that something could get stuck. The only thing found is a fingerprint on a coffee mug, and it's Robert's. It's not like it was some random person's. So nothing, police got nothing from the car. Although there was a set of footprints, size 13, that were leading away from the car they actually led into a cave, and the SWAT team searched the cave, but they came up with nothing. There was no body, no evidence other than these like footprints leading up to it. And the fact that there was like a cave there is not unusual at all. It said that there was like literally 30, 40 caves within, the surrounding area. So this was just the only one that like there was footprints leading up to, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Ton of caves around. So it was just kind of the natural direction. Like he probably, well, we'll get into it, but you could finish up here and then we'll think, what we think happened and whatnot.
So like I said, the dog had made a bed under the car. He was untied. Obviously somebody left him there. Being that it was a family car and the family dog, this wasn't just some random dog that like found, a home under a car. And police weren't really sure like what to make of that. It's a very odd piece of the puzzle, but that brings them to the cave being searched. They brought in the SWAT team to help them search because there was just so much area to cover, and they didn't find anything. And this brings us actually to July of 2001. They put out an arrest warrant for Robert on 3 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of arson. And then June of 2002, so like almost a year later, that's when he was put on the FBI 10 most wanted list. And there was, and there still is a $100,000 reward for anything leading to his arrest. And that's, to this day, this case is still cold. They have no answers.
That's what they have. So it's crazy. It really is crazy. From, like I said, just the pictures of this guy who just looks he really looks like a mean fucking dude.
Yeah, he looks like someone you don't want to mess with.
No,
like, very
not
much
at all.
Like looks like he's got a temper. Looks like he's capable of some things. The FBI put him on the list, and there have been like hundreds of quote unquote sightings of him, whether it's him or not. Some of them are pretty legit, and they kind of tie into the theories, which we'll talk about. Essentially, it's either been speculated that he went into one of those caves and he committed suicide, or he has completely started a new life. And that's, he's just like living out there incognito somewhere.
Yeah. Let's get into part 2. But before we do, I have to talk about Roman one more time, because I just got to get it one more. Like I said, I got to get this through of how good this deal is, because I would feel bad if the Dog Walk listeners got shut out, because Roman's really, really giving it to you for Valentine's Day, because it could be a stressful time and they want to help you out. So lucky you can do that with Roman. You can relax, because whether you're dealing with ED or you're more concerned about lasting longer in bed, they got you covered. Because for a limited time, Roman has special offers to make sure you're ready for Valentine's Day. Get up to $35 off your first month of ED treatment if you're prescribed. And if you purchase swipes, you'll get a free bottle of lube added to your order while supplies last. The whole process is very straightforward, simple, and discreet, and it's one less thing you're going to have to worry about on Valentine's Day. So like I said, for a limited time, get up to $35 off your first month of ED treatment if prescribed. And if you purchase swipes, you'll get a free bottle of lube added to your order while supplies last. Complete this by February 10th. The online visit, like I said, February 10th. That's the main date, people. It's guaranteed delivery by Valentine's Day. If you do it by February 10th, then everything's approved. To do this, all you got to do is go to getroman.com/dogwalk to get started. That's getroman.com/dogwalk to get started. It's a no-brainer if you need help in these areas, and it's a no-brainer if you want to please your girl on Valentine's Day. So go do it. And let's hop into part 2 of True Crime Friday. I don't know. Yeah, this is, you start.
There's a lot of different ways that you could go with this one, because there's so many unknowns and so many like weird pieces to the story. So if we're going the premeditated route, you could attribute it to Robert, obviously, very easily, that it was premeditated because of divorce threats. What somewhat doesn't make sense to me is, so I get why the house would be, this is weird to say, but I get why it would be exploded versus set on fire, because like you said, that gave him time to make himself scarce and get out of the area. But what doesn't make sense to me is why do that at all? Why use fire at all? Because he was a firefighter. He knew that what fire did to bodies, that it wasn't just going to like completely disintegrate a body. And two, by not only setting the house on fire, but exploding it, you're creating this like huge scene, huge call for attention to be like, look at what's going on here, instead of just leaving the dead bodies. To me, that would give him more time to get away.
Yeah, that's a very good point.
Find those bodies for a while.
It's a very good point, because then it'd be like, hey, we haven't seen the kids, we haven't seen the wife in like 3 days. Like, why don't we go do a wellness check? We haven't seen Robert even, because he would obviously be gone too. That would give him a lot more time, you would think. That's a really good point.
Mm-hmm.
That's a really good point, because the what he did was just like, the explosion was so huge. Like we said, there was 0.5 miles from each direction. You felt it. So I don't know. Is there a little bit of like spice to his deal? Like, is that what he wanted?
Yeah, unless like the only thing I could think of was like, unless he thought that exploding the house instead of setting it on fire was going to like literally explode the bodies into a million pieces. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Which could be, maybe he thought that. I don't, to my knowledge, he doesn't have like a bunch of experience. Well, I don't know. He was in the Navy, so maybe he does have experience with like bombs and stuff. So
yeah, but then again, people said as well where they thought the bullet, because only the wife had the shotgun to her head, to the back of her head, that people thought that was like a final like fuck you to her.
Yeah.
But then again, like if you're gonna do that and then you're gonna make it look like an accident, I mean, granted, he disappeared. He didn't claim innocence, because if you disappear, you're to me at least, you're either A, against your will, or you're B, you're leaving so you could stay away from any accountability, any type of being a suspect. So the bullet didn't burn. Bullets won't. It was there, it lodged there in her head. So it's like another thing where I don't know what he was really thinking, because he was thinking enough to know like, hey, if I rip out the gas line, if I light the candle, it'll give me this much time. But he wasn't thinking enough to be like, hey, I don't have to do this at all, because like, who's gonna really come knocking, unless if there was someone that regularly did come over, that's the only thing I could think of.
Right. This also, like with, he did, I don't know. It doesn't make sense. Like if he had premeditated to kill the family and explode the house and get away, why did he only, two things. Why did he only take out $280 when there was clearly more than that he could have taken out? And two, why did he take the dog and then abandon the dog? Those to me don't, like, I could see taking the dog because you don't have the heart to literally explode your dog, but you do your family. But like then leaving the dog because someone could recognize you, if they knew the family had a dog named Blue and it was whatever kind of dog it was, and like someone recognizes you because of that. So maybe you just like leave it abandoned. But
yeah, I'm not as hung up on the dog, because I'm not as hung up on the dog, because to me, and it's bad to say it, but some people like their dogs more than they like the people, right? The dog's not going to come home and, start yelling at you and call you a piece of shit.
Yeah.
And he was a hunter. Like those people bond with their animals more. And there was reports that he was always kind of disappointed in his 10-year-old son because he wasn't macho and he wasn't like a hunter. He didn't enjoy fishing. So he had a reason to rationalize in a sick, twisted way to do this to him, which is fucked up. But in his mind, that's what I think maybe. And in his eyes, it was like, all right, I'm bringing Blue. Like Blue is, I don't know.
He's coming with me.
Yeah, exactly. I don't know.
But then why abandon him?
Maybe you get to a point where your survival and what you need to do it just overcomes that. That would be my take. Where it's like, hey, I'm on the run. I need to go through these caves. I need to possibly hitchhike. I need to find another family. I need to do this and that. It's harder to do with worrying about something else. Who's going to bark? Who's going to do, what's going to.
Yeah, that's fair. To be like, I can't take care of you. Like, run free.
Yes, exactly.
Like, hopefully someone will find this dog. Okay, I could see that.
And I'm sure he did think that the dog would run free, right?
Sure. And okay, so that's fair. There's also, so what I have not been able to place is that day, the day the house exploded. So April 9th, Robert had off work, which is a Monday. April 10th. So once they figure out, all right, we've got Mary, Brittany, and Robert Jr., where's Robert Sr.? They find out that he wasn't working that day. What I don't know, and what I think is kind of an important piece of information to like forming a theory, is was he supposed to work that day? Or did he also have that day off? Because if he's not intentionally not showing up to work is like a no call, no show, or he just like had the day off and it's not unusual that he's not at work. That's something that could definitely play into it. But also, the $280 he withdrew like really throws me. I don't know if he went to the ATM, if we're saying he is guilty here, if he went to the ATM before or after he killed the family. Obviously, the explosion took a while, but we don't know the time of death for the Mary and the kids.
Yeah, this is 2001, so there's not going to be cameras, you would think, in a lot of places where there would be now, where you're going to see a vehicle driving at this time or that time. So yeah, they did hear that argument, but that who's to say that he didn't get the money and then go back and do this? That's a good point. I don't know if that changes anything, but it could be.
Yeah, it's just kind of a misplaced piece, and the the time of death and all that stuff couldn't really be determined because obviously the bodies were like burnt to a crisp. So you lost a lot of evidence with that, unfortunately. But if he either had a fight, left to go camping, went to the ATM, he was still so mad after running that errand that he went back and killed the family, and then he felt the need to cover it up, give himself time to get away. He thought somehow the explosion was the best way to do that. And, that could be his need to disappear, or had a fight, killed the family, and then for some reason, like withdrew $280 to make it look like he was just like going on one of his normal camping trips to be like, oh, I'm innocent. I was, I do that all the time kind of thing. But that kind of
weird too. What was weird too was if he had that head start and they were in Scottsdale, that's where the house was and the murders happened. They found the car in northern Arizona. Like, he did not go far for giving that head start and having a couple days. Granted, he didn't know, if we're saying that the pine leaves mean that it was there for less than 24, what was he doing in between there? That's also very mysterious to me too.
Yeah. Like if you're going to plan a getaway, and he wasn't named as a suspect until 4 days later. So that gives you 4 days to literally go anywhere. Yeah. And you're right. He didn't, the car was found in Arizona and fresh when it was found. So it just does not add up to me. And so that's kind of the theory of like a premeditation. Now, you could also attribute it to, like we talked about, he had Jekyll and Hyde syndrome. Clearly he had some like marbles loose in his head, a psychotic break, if we're still going with Robert did it. So having the Jekyll and Hyde syndrome, getting in another one of their big fights, knowing that Mary Fisher was about to file for divorce, he was like, all right, this caused him to have a break. He'd had enough, murdered his family, again, felt the need to cover it up and flee. The gun that Mary was shot with, the caliber that Mary was shot with, that gun of the same caliber was missing from the family home when they did stuff. So that could point to Robert. It could point to if someone knew there was guns in the homes, if it was someone else, it could, is not super damning evidence, but it's very fishy evidence. But if we're going with the psychotic break, or, that could point to, so there's 4 different types of family annihilators. There's self-righteous, which essentially means you blame your partner, to be like, oh, I blame my husband or my wife or my partner for this family being a failure. And that is one type of family annihilator. You get the disappointed type, which is like they believe that the family has let them down and the only resolution is to take them out. And then you get the anomic type, which they see their family as linked to their success. So when their success fails, their family fails, and they end up becoming a family annihilator that way. Now, the last one is paranoid. So they see an external threat to the family, and the only way to avoid this is to kill them, which this is where Robert fits into that. Being paranoid about the divorce, losing control over his family, kind of that if I can't have them, no one can situation.
Yeah, it's the sickest of the sick. And this is what these cases drive you nuts, because he would rather kill his family than get divorced, which is like, dude, what the fuck are you thinking? And it's the same ones where these parents kill their kids, and it's like, I just couldn't deal with them anymore. I couldn't, whatever. It's like there's so many ways to go about this than do that. Granted, like these people are in a fucking different state, have headspace, I guess, but it just drives me. These are the ones that drive me the most nuts. It's Chris Benoit. I don't know if you know the wrestler, who did, the same thing with his family. It's just like, it's
right. It's great. It's a different, something's obviously sick in the head there, but if we're going with the Robert theory, that's where he fits into the kind of family annihilator aspect of it. And it fits in pretty well. Might I add. Now, theory number 2.5, 3-ish. He had an accomplice or someone else did it. A couple ways you can go with this. One, Robert didn't act alone. He had it was said he was having an affair on the side still with this secret girlfriend of his. So him and this girlfriend made a plan to eliminate the family so that they could be together, because Robert didn't see divorce as an option. And he wasn't going to put his family through that, but wanted an out. Or you can say that Robert took off on his camping trip like normal. He had the dog with him. The $280 would cover him to be gone for a couple days. And then the girlfriend was actually the facilitator of all of it, to be like, she went in, she murdered the family. She's obviously got a personal motive to be like, you're making Robert unhappy. We want to be together. So I'm going to do this for Robert, kills the family and explodes the home. Thinking that that's going to destroy everything, not having that firefighter background knowledge. This to me would also be the only reason the car would have been wiped clean, so that you can't tie it to anybody else being involved.
That's an interesting thought. Okay. I
because if it was
that.
Robert, why wipe the car clean? What's doing that?
I don't know. You make a great point. However, I still don't think anyone else was involved.
No, you think he acted alone?
Yes, I do. Because at this point, we are almost 20 years out. I think there'd be something.
Yes, I could see where like maybe someone would turn on someone or, try and strike a deal or something. Obviously law enforcement has not put out any leads for like an accomplice or anything, but why wipe the car down? I cannot get past the point that the car was wiped down. And that's the only reason I think someone else may have been involved, other than like the weird ATM amount, using fire, even though he had fire background, or using fire at all. And the car, like, to me, it's not like there was going to be like necessarily murder evidence in the car. He killed the family in the home. So there would be evidence in the home, hence the explosion. But the car, like, it does not make sense to me.
It also just doesn't make sense that he didn't take his own car.
Right. The one he has a fresh oil change in.
Yes. But why take your wife's, especially if you're going to be, I mean, I don't know the terrain value with fucking a 4Runner, but he had a pickup truck. I believe you could see burning with the house.
So I'm convinced that someone else was involved. You obviously are not.
Really? You are?
I'm convinced. Because the car is wiped down, I'm convinced that someone else had some sort of involvement, whether someone else facilitated it or they were in on it together. That the car does not make sense to me.
See, I just think he tweaked. Like, I think he tweaked and was like, oh, I think they're like, they don't got me. Like, I'll have a story for when they come and, they'll see, but you make a great point. I don't know. I like this. This is the second time where we've kind of gone through, other things and we've been against each other. So, yeah.
So that kind of leaves us to, where is he now? Is he dead or is he alive? Some people have said he went into one of the caves, he committed suicide, he's been dead this whole time. Which, the SWAT team searched the cave that the footprints led to the car to the cave. They searched that, they didn't find anything. I would assume that they searched it pretty thoroughly, but you're also dealing with a cave. So natural elements, obviously kind of a hard space to get to, even just to try and get to it, not let alone to search for a body. Or that he fled. He started this incognito life elsewhere. This is why all the sightings of him have been seen, but none of them, there have been some pretty good sightings, but obviously none of them have came to fruition. But
and to your point about the cave though, this is one thing, and I feel like every True Crime Friday, since we started doing this, or every true crime podcast or everything, there's unfortunately usually like, oh, and here is where the police dropped the ball. Here is where the investigation went wrong. This is a situation where the police were in a very hard spot because you're putting a lot of people's lives at risk. You're putting the law enforcement's lives at risk to go in these caves where this guy is, he's armed, he's very dangerous, he's skilled enough to live in this lifestyle as an outdoorsman, where that guy could have just been set up shop in a cave somewhere, and you're just sending, people in to, possibly be killed. And that's where it gets really tough for finding.
You're absolutely right. And there was like 30, 40 caves in the area. They only searched one because that just like that amount of, I don't want to say like effort put into it, because they obviously put a lot of effort into it, but to search, 30, 40 caves is dangerous. It was just, that's too much at that point to even search like an entire national forest. If he had gone into one of the caves, either, he's dead or he has to come out of the forest at some point.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So
what about these sightings though? I didn't get to a ton of that.
So some of the sightings, there's a lot of sightings, all of them were focused up north. The one that was the most valid, I would say, was so actually north just in Canada. So like really just continuing north. There was a guy in prison who looked, literally identical to Robert Fisher. And so in order to kind of test that, there was a former neighbor of the Fishers actually living in Seattle at the time. And they're like, all right, we're going to use you as bait. So they put this guy in the jail, like acting like they're booking him for whatever. And they intentionally bring Robert out into the hall and walk him past this guy or quote unquote, Robert Fisher. So, he kind of does what every person does. You enter a room, you kind of like scan the room, see who's there. He's scanning the room. He looks at this dude that he is hypothetically knows. And then he does this like double take. And all of a sudden the neighbor said, he was like, it looked like he saw a ghost. He was like, what the hell are you doing here? And so like that in and of itself was like, all right, that's, can be pretty legit. But the guy also said he looked exactly like Robert Fisher. He sounded exactly like Robert Fisher. And he had the same exact scar on his back as Robert did from having back surgery. So like a pretty big scar. In the spot where Robert Fisher's gold tooth would have been, that tooth was gone. So like that's, to me, that's a pretty legit sighting. The only thing that did not match up, and there could potentially be several reasons for this, was the fingerprints didn't match Robert's. Now, there could be several reasons for that. It didn't say why the fingerprints didn't match, just that they didn't. So either he, altered them they were maybe partially burned off or altered in some way, or they, the fingerprints weren't rolled the first time. The evidence they found, a lot of reasons they didn't take DNA, which I wish they would have, because, that could test it a lot more clearly than fingerprints could. But that was a pretty legit sighting. There was a couple others that were like, him and, or someone that resembled him and a girl were seen at a bar. And then, later on, the girl was like freaking out at night. And like, I came up here with my boyfriend. He left me. Like, we can't, we've done horrible things. Like, we can't be separated, kind of thing. And then just like other general sightings to be like, oh, this guy looks a lot like Robert Fisher. Like someone actually, I don't know if you saw the Instagram of the pictures I posted, but someone commented and was like, this is it's not, I wouldn't find it odd that like someone else would look like him. He was like, I go to the gas station and I see 3 people that look like this. Like,
yeah, for sure.
So who knows if obviously none of those sightings have came to fruition, or some of them probably were not him, but I don't know. I think he's still alive. I think he is somewhere out there.
You think so?
I do.
Yeah. I mean, he looks like a guy who would like, you'd see at a gas station in Wisconsin with a camo hat on. Like he really does. He looks like a pretty average Joe, but those eyes and, so they never, that's tough that they said he looked exactly like him, had all those striking marks like the back surgery scar, and they weren't able to get anything. That's tough.
I know that, like, that also really throws me. The fingerprints is what throws me, because, and again, there's like a lot more questions that I have about the fingerprints that we obviously don't have answers to, but I don't know. I think he's still out there somewhere. I think it's kind of odd to me actually that his reward is still only $100,000. Like, it's still the same reward that they put out originally. So I'm like, all right, we're almost 20 years down the road. If someone finds him, they deserve a lot more than that.
Yeah. And it's crazy too, that they're still, that he's been on the FBI's most wanted list for so long. Mm-hmm. Like he's like, they change people in and out, of course, obviously once they get someone, they take them down, they add someone new, but he's been a mainstay on that thing for a long time, basically since the beginning when this happened. And, I always come through that. And it's like, man, that makes you think like the FBI really wants this dude.
Yeah. And then also I think goes to show just like how dangerous he actually is, especially for how skilled he is. And this like incredibly gruesome multi-layer crime. Like, it very much goes to show this guy is not a force to be reckoned with, and like needs to be, they're still focused on taking him down. Yeah.
I'm going to be interested to see what happens. Cause I know at the 15-year mark, they released a bunch of billboards and they had like an age progression where like what he might look like now. Yeah, they did have the age
progression. Yeah. Of what he would look like.
Yeah. And so they did that at the 15-year mark. So I hope here 20 years is coming up in April. I hope that there's another kind of step here, or maybe another idea, because he's a bad dude.
He's a bad dude. He's dangerous.
I agree. I do think he's alive.
You do? All right. So we're
Yeah.
lining up on something.
Yes, exactly. Yes, we're on that. And I think I say that because if they genuinely thought he was dead, I don't think he's on that list.
No, I don't. Yeah, they might not
Right?
even bother. Yeah. Also, like just hearing about who he was as a person, being like, you know, super controlling, wanting this like perfect image thing, to me doesn't point to like someone who's going to go out that, you know, committing suicide to be like, oh, I'm just going to give it all up. To me, that more so points to like, I've got to make this better somehow.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
who knows if
Yeah.
I'd be interested to see, at the 20-year mark, what law enforcement does. I obviously, like, as far as our listeners goes, I want to hear everybody's opinion, because I think there's just so many different ways to go on this case. Everybody's got a different theory, or, you know, there could be theories that we're not even thinking of. You could literally make this case like it's an own entire podcast. You could go down so many rabbit holes.
For sure. And like I said, definitely just Google FBI's top 10 most wanted. You'll see that. When you dig in, you'll see the explosion. You'll see where the Forerunner was left. And it's a head scratcher for sure. And just a fucking bad dude. And of course, it's not 100% confirmed that he did that. So everything's alleged, but at the same time, I don't like him. But
yeah, he's not looking good. I mean, innocent until proven guilty, but he's nowhere to be found. So
all right, Allie, thanks for this. That's it for today, everyone. We'll be back next week. See you guys on Monday. That's all we got.
All right. See ya.